Welcome to the XtextCasts. This week I would like to talk about testing and present to you a new test framework. Let's compare Ruby on Rails world with the Java world. Ruby is a dynamic typed language. There are very little checks that can be performed at the load time, and this means you need actually a very good test coverage in order to get maintainable software. The Java, on the other hand, is statically typed language, so we don't actually need a good test coverage. Nearest everything can be checked at the compile time, right? Of course not. The fact that the Java is a statically typed language provides often the false confidence, so many people are satisfied with a poor test coverage. In fact, Java isn't that much statically typed. Consider, for example, the reflection API or even simple typecasting. And I know almost no software bigger than Hello World example that doesn't cast types and make no use of the reflection API. As a result, we need nearest the same test coverage for the Java code as for the Ruby code. Since in the Ruby world the tests are so obviously important, the good effort was put into development of the new test principles and test frameworks. And in my opinion, the two most powerful and flexible test frameworks are rspec and Cucumber. Let's take a look of both. The rspec framework is very good for unit testing as well as controller and view testing. It uses embedded domain-specific language, embedded in the Ruby of course, that allows us to describe the test file, describe each test, and use a very fancy assertion API. The next framework is a Cucumber. It uses business-readable domain-specific language, or put it simply English, or almost any other spoken language, to define tests. And together with the step definitions written on Ruby, it becomes a self-verifiable documentation. Since some time I was looking for one or more test frameworks that could provide the same test experience in the Java world. And finally I found Jnario. And the Jnario test framework is actually the combination of the rspec and Cucumber. The additional benefit of the Jnario is that it's built with an Xtext and uses Xbase expressions all over the place. Absolutely incredible. And I already installed Jnario from the update site for the official releases into a fresh Eclipse IDE for the Java developers. Now, let's write using test-driven development a simple user class that supports authentication. And I start with a simple Java project. And first I create the user class. Then I go ahead and create the first user spec. And we are going to test the user class. And this will be the user spec in the package tests auth. And the first error we have to resolve is to add the Jnario libs to the class path. So let's describe the user class. User with name, login, and password that supports authentication. And the first fact is user can be created with username, login, and password. So we create an instance from the user class, passing John Smith as a name, J Smith as a login, and pass 1 as a password, and we expect to have a user with username John Smith and login J Smith. And we cannot test a password here, since the user should not provide the password to the public. And now let's add the implementation. And we can generate the constructor using fields. And since we don't have to implement something that is not tested, we don't have to assign the password here, and we will going to need the username getter and login getter. And now if we run our test, it passes. And if we break something, it shows us the error message. Very nice. Now let's add another spec, another fact. User accepts correct login and password. So we need a user one more time, and we can just put it in the scope of the description, the user creation, and then the user will be accessible in all our facts. So just call the login method with jsmith and the correct password pass1. And now we have to implement the login method, and of course actually we have to verify that the method returns true. And it is very simple to write this kind of login method. We have just to return true. And now everything works. And we have to add another fact, so we implement our login method correctly. And we add user does not accept wrong login. And this will be user login jdo with the correct password returns false. And this is this test fails, so we have to add a login check. And now we are green again. But this is not enough, we have to test the password also. And we add a correct username but a wrong password. And let's see this fail, and it is. It does, so we add here password check. And this gets the null point exception. We have to set the password in the constructor, and now we are done. Now let's pretend we want to write an integration test. So we add a feature. User. We call our feature user login, and we provide some plain text. Users can log into the system, and we write our first scenario. Users with correct credentials can log in. So given a user with the username jsmith and password pass1, when user logins or tries to log in with the correct credentials, then it works. And then we can add another scenario. If the user tries to log in with the incorrect credentials, then the user tries to log in with the incorrect password pass2, it doesn't work. So we can run this test, but of course all tests will be ignored since there is no implementation behind those lines. So let's add one. And here we create a user with some name, it doesn't matter here, and we can reference these parameters with the args first and args second, and let's import the user, and then we save it into the user variable. User tries to log in with correct credentials, so we have to call login user username and some password, and password we're going to save here. So then it works. We have to save the result of this call. Just like this. And as you can see, this is going to be a code duplication. So we can introduce a background and pull this given into the background. So now the implementation is available for all scenarios. So then we implement when, and we use this wrong password from the argument, and we assert the result should be false. And now we are ready to run. And it does not work, so this should be the login and not the username. And now we are green. Now let's disable the code and look at our test definition. This is business readable. Now let's write a test suite very quickly. And we call it all tests. And here we can define the structure all of our tests. For example, unit tests. And we can add here user section and add our spec, and then add integration tests with our auth test and add here our feature. And when we point the cursor and right click of this line above, then the entire suite gets executed, so we get a very nice structure of all our tests. If we point, for example, here, get the cursor on the auth and run it, we get just this part executed. Very nice. That's all for the Jnario right now. I encourage you to give it a try, and I see you in a week. Thank you for watching XtextCasts. Go to the XtextCasts.org to get show notes, discussions and more episodes.